The White House is laying out its economic plans to deter Russia from more aggression toward Ukraine. Right now, that includes massive economic sanctions. The U.S. would impose restrictions on American-made tech Russia needs to diversify its economy, especially in the digital and defense sectors. And the U.S. is working with European allies to shore up oil and natural gas supplies to help lessen the blow of Russia trying to shut off gas to Europe. NATO is bolstering its military presence in the Baltic Sea region and several countries along the alliance's eastern flank. And overnight, another shipment of U.S. military aid, including ammunition, arriving in Ukraine. It's part of a $200 million package of security assistance to the country facing the potential threat of a Russian invasion. And the U.S. is putting 8,500 troops on heightened alert to help NATO forces in the region. Now I want to bring in Jim Townsend, an adjunct senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO Policy at the Pentagon. Sir, thank you so much for your time. I want to start with the idea of putting 8,500 American troops on alert for potential deployment to Eastern Europe. Is that enough considering how many troops that Russia has built up along the border?
Well, one thing that I think has been lost in a lot of this is much of that troop level, that 8,500, they're earmarked to join the NATO response force, and that's 40,000 troops. Right now, it's commanded by the French, and the U.S. contribution to that force is 8,500. But even so, I think what's important here is that at least we've started. We didn't want to provoke Russia in the past. We were tiptoeing around. We focused primarily on economic sanctions, but now I think the administration realizes they've got to show more teeth, and this is, I hope, just the beginning.
What about those sanctions in the past? Where they're threatening them again on the economic front, targeting in part the tech sector. Do these sanctions work? Because it looks like Russia just keeps acting up.
Well, you're right. They didn't work last time, obviously. They didn't stop Putin from continuing to do aggressive things between 2014 when they invaded Ukraine the first time. And now here we are, we're at it again. I think he feels stronger, Putin does, in terms of how to handle economic sanctions. No matter how targeted they may be, the personalities, I think right now he feels pretty strong that he can handle anything.
Could Ukraine hold off a Russian invasion with all the new military it got from the West? And if so, for how long?
Well, it all depends. I think Ukraine will certainly fight. They will make it painful for the Russians. And this is something that could be very bloody and awful to see. But at the end of the day, I think the Russians certainly have the preponderance of forces, armor, that type of thing. And let's hope that instead of seeing that, we see diplomacy or we see another way to deter him from going into what could be a very bloody fight.
Russia has made some demands like barring Ukraine from NATO, scaling back allied troops presence in Europe, but Western leaders call these non-starters. And I want to play some of what UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said earlier today. Let's play that clip.
We cannot bargain away the vision of a Europe whole and free that emerged in those amazing years from 1989 to 1991, healing the division of our continent by the Iron Curtain. We will not reopen that divide by agreeing to overturn the European security order because Russia has placed a gun to Ukraine's head.
Obviously, a lot of countries concerned about an invasion of Ukraine. What is the broader significance beyond Ukraine? Is Russia trying to remake the international order, and will it succeed?
Well, I think Putin has a number of agenda items. It's almost a menu that he seems to choose from. Obviously, Ukraine is number one. He didn't like the idea of Ukraine joining NATO or the EU, getting too close to the West. But things began to grow, and he began to demand other things to the point where it looked like he wanted to have a reshaping of the European security balance, so the conventional forces there. And so I think there's a willingness to talk about arms control, about exercises, trying to do some things to make the balance there more stable. But as you just played with the prime minister, I think there's unity within the alliance that there's some things we will not do, and that is to infringe on the sovereignty of nations like Ukraine to decide what kind of alliance they want to join, to give Russia a veto on NATO-related things, and the principles that we all stood for at NATO in terms of rules of law, the Helsinki Final Act that we signed in 1975 saying that you don't invade another country to change borders. So I think there's a lot of things that all of us are united against Russia for, and one of those is these values that we have to hold fast to them, and that's what Boris Johnson was talking about.
This is proving to be one of the biggest foreign policy challenges for President Biden. What do you make of his administration's handling of the Ukraine crisis? You know, there was that news conference that the president gave recently where he's talked about, you know, the difference of a minor incursion. The language has become really important. What does that tell you about the president's response to all of this?
Well, you know, the administration came in after the inauguration with a big domestic agenda. There were a lot of things, as we all know, in the United States that needed attending to. Russia was not high on his agenda. When it came to foreign policy, it was China. It was something that certainly the previous president, as well as President Obama, wanted to try to tackle, was the Pacific. And, of course, Russia popped up into the middle of that, showing us once again that you can't ignore Russia. You can't ignore European security. So they've had to scramble to try to figure out, so what are we going to do about Russia? And it was some very sensitive early negotiations with the Russians, trying to keep things on a simmer. And that's not where Putin was. I think Putin saw his opportunity to go in for a larger prize, not just Ukraine, but other things as well that we had talked about earlier. And I think that that has presented the Biden administration with a real challenge. And as you could see from this past weekend, there was a pivot in their approach from a diplomatic track to now adding some military muscle to it as well. So they're taking it as it comes, still in a reactive mode, but we've got unity behind us. We've got the alliance, 30 nations behind this approach to Putin. So far, I think President Biden has played his hand pretty well, but we've got a long way to go.
What about the idea of not just the military side of this, but Russia provoking Ukraine in another way, perhaps through cyber attacks inside the country, or based on UK intelligence, I believe it was, that was saying that there could be an attempt to install a pro-Russian authority figure in power. Is that something that is a real possibility?
Oh, absolutely. Putin is amazing in terms of the toolbox that he has. It's not just a military hammer. He has other things called hybrid war, if you will, and it's these techniques like cyber attacks, misinformation, disinformation. It's the kind of toppling of a leader that you just mentioned that the Brits talked about over the weekend. Those are all tools that he uses. Sometimes he does just one thing to bully a nation. He'll do a cyber attack. He will do threatening military exercises along the border, but nothing else. But he can also use a cyber attack and then 2 days later move in with forces as well. So it's a full panoply of options that Putin uses when he wants to bully or to actually invade a country. We've seen it in the past, and we're going to see it again.
Just briefly to end on here, how do you see this whole thing playing out? Can you give us a couple of scenarios?
Well, I guess if it stays on a diplomatic track, which isn't over yet, there's going to be probably another set of talks coming up when we provide to the Russians written answers to their draft treaties that they put on the table. So there's still some talks going on. I think the French were hosting something today as well. So we can't give up on that. And part of showing the military teeth, both NATO, talking about the NATO response force, U.S. forces on higher alert, it's pushing this diplomatic track a little bit by showing what could happen if the diplomatic track is deviated from. So let's hope for that. If that doesn't happen, if Putin is all in to do something such as an invasion, it could unfold in many different ways. It could be something that you had just mentioned. It could be a bad cyber attack. It could be some things that really try to bully and intimidate the sitting Ukraine government, or it could be the other end. It could be big. It could be could involve tanks, aircraft, troops crossing the borders from different angles of attack into Ukraine. It could be something that we haven't seen for decades in Europe. So it could be that as well. We don't know. We can only hope that this diplomatic track might help to help us avoid that. And if it doesn't, those are some of the options.
Or possibly a combination of the two between military and cyber, given how sophisticated military technology is right now. Jim Townsend with the Center for a New American Security. Thank you so much for your time, sir. We really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the invitation.